Alrighty. Good morning, Teddy. We got a special plan for today. We are not going to be doing Luke chapter 4 yet. We are going to be doing reading a new article that I wrote. We are going to be reading from my Substack, a new piece that I wrote that I think you guys are going to be interested in. And I will get into that pretty soon. For those who are just tuning in, my name is Terry Wolf, and that's my linktree/Wolfpox. You can go there to find links to my YouTube channel, my Twitter, everything else that I'm doing. And these are two books that I wrote. One is called Maybe Everyone is Wrong, Revelations, Conspiracy in the Kingdom of Heaven, and the other one is called Fire in the Rabbit Hole. This one here is... The one on this side is Big Interpretation of Revelation, and this one is sort of the current day analysis of the conspiracy and all the psyops that are going on to try to deceive Christians. Corey from Nunavut. Now that's different. What's it like up there at this time of year? It's cold here. I can't imagine what it's like there. Good to know you've got TikTok and a good internet connection. So for everyone who's joining for the morning study session, the plan here is to do a study, or rather a reading of a Substack article that I wrote yesterday, and I just published it yesterday. So I'm excited to share it with you guys, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Cindy on YouTube says, good morning, 4:30. Well, I don't know what you're doing up at 4:30, but welcome. It's 6:30 here, and that's already pretty early. Washington State. You know, for the longest time, I'm sure this is common with a lot of different countries, but I had no idea about Washington State being on the West Coast. That was pretty recent that I actually learned properly what Washington State was. So, if you're on the YouTube channel, you can get the actual screenshot, the live capture of my article that I wrote. If you've already been paying attention, if you're subscribed to my Substack, you will have seen a notification for it in your email. But most of you will not have seen this yet. So I will be presenting it and commenting on it. Let me just pull up the chat so it's larger here. I think we should probably at least introduce the idea of it right away. So the title of the article is called The Hillel Hoax, The Chosen Season 2 Critique. Subtitle, A Dangerous Deception is at Play in Everyone's Favorite Show About Jesus. It's called The Hillel Hoax. That's what I called it. And then I have a link to my Season 1 review, and then my article on how the Chosen seems to hate John the Baptist. And the first thing we do is we start off with this screenshot that I took from the show of Jesus, the actor that plays Jesus, putting his forehead up against Mary's forehead and saying, if not now. And then she finishes his sentence later and says, when? So if not now, when? And that's the screenshot I have at first there. Teddy says, how do you choose your titles? Well, this is something I've wanted to write about anyway, but seeing it in Chosen just reminded me how important it is. All right. So I'm about ready to start reading this. Cosmic Bunny says, did you ever look into the Book of Mormon? I have looked into it a little bit. Yeah, there wasn't much to digest there. I mean, it's just a fake doctrine. All right. The Hillel Hoax. Here's what I say. First section is called Choosing Traditions. In retelling the story of Jesus Christ, it is inevitable that writers must involve the Pharisees. Jesus repeatedly comments on how the Pharisees were corrupt, wicked, and prevented people from learning the truth. Retellings of the gospel typically show the Pharisees to be evil. So the question is how the Chosen would depict them, with its odd revisionist tendencies and false claims about accuracy. Most Christians probably don't even realize there are opposing sides in the debate around the Pharisees, or understand the implications of picking one or the other. This article will help you understand the controversy and where the Chosen fits into it. Good morning, Stapleton and Patronizing Saint. We're talking about the Chosen Season 2. I've been talking to you guys about this in this stream a little bit. I finally decided to write it. I got some time to write it. And it's all about the Pharisees here. So the next section is called Remembering What Jesus Said. Before we go further, let's remember how severely Jesus actually condemned the Pharisees, shall we? All of Matthew chapter 23, is a diatribe against their evil ways, where he says this about them collectively. Number 1, Pharisees are hypocrites, laying heavy burdens on men's shoulders, but are not willing to move a finger to lift them. That's in verse 4. Conservative Joe says, I really like The Chosen. Well, that's fine, that's fair, but I am going to critique it. And you'll see why by the end of this article. Verse 2, the deeds of the Pharisees are all for men to see. They love places of honor and chief seats, greetings in the marketplaces, and being called rabbi. That's an important point. They want to be called rabbis. That's right in the New Testament, in the Bible. And then I have, by the way, Jesus specifically says to call no one rabbi in Matthew 23, verse 8. But they love to be called rabbi. Number 3, they shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces and do not enter it themselves, blocking the path to it. Number 4, Jesus says they travel across land and sea. Oops, I misspelled sea. This should be sea as in water body. To make a single convert. But once he becomes one of them, they make him twice the son of hell as the Pharisees are. That's a pretty bad condemnation. They make their converts twice the son of hell as they are. That means that they're a son of hell. Number 5, Jesus says they are blind guides. Number 6, they pay tithes, but they disregard the more important parts, which are justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And yes, there's like 4 more points here. Number 8, they are whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful outwardly, but are full of dead men's bones and every kind of impurity. Likewise, they outwardly appear to be righteous, but inside, he says, quote, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. This is really harsh. I mean, these are all in the same chapter, back to back to back. Matthew 23. Number 9, they are identified with those who murdered the prophets. And he says they will do likewise. That's verse 29 to 32. Point number 10. He says they are snakes, a brood of vipers, and have little chance to escape hell. You might remember in The Chosen, John, Creepy John as they call him, John the Baptist, says that they are a brood of vipers. And I don't know if it's Jesus or if it's somebody else, but somebody says, you know that's like a really harsh thing to say to somebody, right? Like that vipers like eat their mother from the inside out and like kill her as they're being born. Like that's like really terrible. And he's like, yeah, bro, it's super gnarly. Let me just eat some bugs here and smoke some weed and go back and like kick some ass because I'm just a rebel. I'm going to call them a brood of vipers. Jesus called them a brood of vipers. It's not some crazy thing that John the Baptist came up with. It's what Jesus calls them. Last one, number 11. And there's actually more than this. I'm just, getting the main ones here. Number 11, Jesus will send them prophets, wise men, and teachers so that they can kill, crucify, and punish them. Even the word crucify, Jesus says the Pharisees will crucify Christ's followers, which goes against the entire notion that, Jews and the Pharisees had they're not to blame for the crucifixions. That was the Romans that decide those things and sort of this distancing. No, Jesus says that they will crucify the followers. Here's a quote from him. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. That's verse 34 to 35 of Matthew 23. How could you possibly say that? Upon those Pharisees will come the blood of Abel and the prophet Zechariah like 450 years earlier. But that's what he says. He says, you murdered them you murdered him between the temple and the altar. He's blaming them for the deaths of these prophets. So Jesus is seriously condemning these people. Teddy, yes, they do call him Creepy John over and over and over again. I have an article on my Substack here where the entire article is about how much The Chosen seems to hate John the Baptist and just make fun of him. Stapleton says, what do you think of Nicodemus not spelled right, Terry? What do you mean not spelled right? Where is it spelled differently? Because there's no K in the Bible for Nicodemus, if that's what you mean. It's Nicodemus with a C. Does The Chosen have a CK or what? I Defy You says, in defense of the show, John the Baptist was a wild man. Not that wild. Not so wild that people were mocking him. In fact, we just were reading the Gospel of Luke yesterday and seeing how he was considered to be the Christ. Some people thought he was the Christ. People were excited at his birth. He was very respected and honored. He wasn't just a random crazy guy. That's what modern preachers like to put in there. But the connotations of him wearing fur and eating locusts and honey and wild things out in there, we don't have any indication I don't think we have any indication in the actual Gospels or New Testament that people thought he was ridiculous or crazy that way. Unusual, yeah, but very much sort of like an old school prophet, not not just crazy. Stapleton says, I want to know your thoughts on him. Yes, John the Baptist lived in the wilderness because he went all over baptizing people. Well, what was that thing about Nicodemus? I don't understand that. Anyway, I'm just going to carry on here. So those are the 11 things in that one chapter alone that Jesus talks about the Pharisees, right? So it says, surely anyone who reads these words would realize that the Pharisees were generally despicable and that Jesus wanted nothing at all to do with them. He was certainly not a Pharisee himself. However, if you've watched the show, you know that The Chosen primarily focuses on Nicodemus, especially in season 1. He's the Pharisee described in the Gospel of John who honors Jesus and ends up helping his burial. In fact, Nicodemus is the one Jesus was speaking to in the famous John 3:16 passage where Jesus explains his purpose. But we might wonder, where are the wicked Pharisees in the show, the ones Jesus was speaking against? Shouldn't they be shown as the more common example, since he ends up lumping them all together despite Nicodemus? So I have the next section is called Sadducees, Pharisees, and Houses. Stapleton wants to know how I think they did with Nicodemus' character. Did they do him justice? I think they went further than, clearly they went further than the Bible says, like him leaving money for Jesus and then crying because he couldn't go with them because his wife was pressuring him to not follow Jesus, and all this kind of like heartbreaking story of him wanting to be a follower of Jesus. That's not in the Bible. He did respect Jesus enough to come and visit him at night, which seems like a secret visit. We know that from the Bible. We know that he had a real discussion with him, that Jesus told him very important things. We don't know anything about Nicodemus's wife, so that whole subplot of his wife is just sort of thrown in there, and that's something I complain about in my season 1 review, is the depiction of women in the show. But basically, I think they did an okay job with him. The actor was certainly very good, and I feel like he had one of the better parts in season 1, and it was nice to see things through his eyes, to see these miracles and things and have him genuinely start to believe in Jesus. But in the Gospels, he's depicted more as a little bit of an oaf, somebody who doesn't actually understand what Jesus is saying. Like, he's the guy that when Jesus says you have to be born again, he says, which they have in the show, but they just make jokes of it in the show. He's like, how can I be born again? Am I supposed to go into my mother's womb and, come back out again as an old man? What am I supposed to do? I can't be born again. And so he's very dense, he doesn't get it. And in the show, it's like, it's just, what am I supposed to do? I want to be born again? What am I supposed to do? And then Jesus is making jokes and Nicodemus is making jokes, and it's like not a very serious conversation in the show. So I feel like they dropped the ball as to the real potential of Nicodemus. But anyway, the next section here is called Sadducees, Pharisees, and Houses. I was shocked at what The Chosen promoted in their quest to be quote-unquote accurate. They end up pushing one of the most insidious and easily debunked lies in history. It is the myth of the two schools of Pharisaic teachings between Hillel and Shammai. If you've never heard of this before, allow me to explain. In reality, the ruling class of Israel was divided between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees were older, meaning their sect, their order was older. Not that the men themselves were necessarily older, but the Sadducees were older. and considered the proper Levitical temple priests, doing the sacrifices and carrying out the important rituals. So they were actually in the temple doing the sacrifices and the worship ceremonies and all that stuff. That's the Sadducees. They had their own soldiers with the authority to capture, interrogate, and imprison, whereas the Pharisees were closer to a civilian party, not actual priests. They acted as legal scholars, scribes, deciding how to interpret the Torah. They came later and were promoted into a position of authority by the Romans, which is why they zealously condemned anyone who seemed to go against Roman authority. The Roman Empire was the basis of the Pharisees' authority at that time. Now, as Jesus said, the Pharisees traveled far and wide to make converts, since they were a special group of intellectuals. The Pharisees, because they were not a priesthood that, the actual priesthood is a bloodline. The child of a priest becomes a priest. That's kind of how it works in the priesthood. And they try to trace their stuff all the way back to Aaron and Moses. But the Pharisees could pull from anywhere, so they would make converts one at a time. Yeah, the Levites, isn't that the part of the Aaron line or something? Weren't they associated with that? Anyway, the Levites, yeah. So the Pharisees were basically intellectuals. They were scholars. They were legal experts. And they had to deal with the Romans. They were basically upheld by Roman authority. And that's the division. The Sadducees, I say, lost their former glory and authority while under the Romans, but they remained detached, entitled, corrupt, and elitist. It's not like the Sadducees were good guys. They were far removed from the daily teachings of the people, while the Pharisees, who loved to be called rabbis or teachers, were aggressive liars, working at the street level as a propagandist movement, creating the false traditions that Jesus hated, condemning anyone who threatened to upset their control of the commoners. Together, the Sadducee priests and Pharisee legislative party made up the Sanhedrin. You guys might have heard of the Sanhedrin. Thank you for the 4,600 likes, by the way. The likes help, and it helps get people into the stream. Good morning, Adrian. Walk in Faith says, Matthew should have been one. A Levite? Maybe. The Sadducee priests and the Pharisee legislative party made up the Sanhedrin, the governing authority over Israel. So those two different groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, together, sometimes there was more Sadducees, sometimes there was more Pharisees, and they didn't like each other, but they would make up the Sanhedrin, which was the governing body over all of Israel. And of course, there was Herod yet above that, I guess. But so the Sanhedrin was very important. There was a serious conflict between Sadducees and Pharisees, but there was no major division among the Pharisees into two different houses. That's my point here. So there was Sadducees and Pharisees, but there wasn't two different Pharisee groups fighting each other. Next section is called, and Petra says, did you see what happened in Israel recently? They found their false Messiah. I've heard that for a while, for 2 years or so, and doesn't seem like much is happening with it, so I don't know. Doesn't really seem like a big deal to me. The next section is called Hillel Never Existed. Marilyn asks, where can I find it? If you're asking about the article that I'm reading that I wrote yesterday, it's on winterchristian.substack.com. And you can go to my link tree, which is actually right here, or at least that's the URL, linktree/wolfpox, linktr.ee/wolfpox, and you can find a link to my Substack that way, and then you can read all of the different articles that I have. Next section is called Hillel Never Existed. This is the important part. We're getting to, so far we've been laying the foundations. Now I'm actually going to start talking about what the big problem is. In Season 2, The Chosen spends a tremendous amount of time exploring Pharisees, but not in accordance with the Bible. Instead, they build up the notion of a clear division among the Pharisees between the followers of Hillel and the followers of Shammai. This tradition comes from the Talmud, which was created by the enemies of Jesus Christ after his death in order to combat the spread of the gospel and keep Jews subjugated under the Pharisees, who would go on to become the rabbis. Does that make sense? So Jesus comes and establishes, obviously, Christianity. And then afterward, the gospel is spreading and a bunch of Jews are converting. And so the rabbis, the Pharisees, go and create the Talmud in order to stop Christianity. So it's an anti-Christian book. W. Hunt says, I still have to say, as long as they tell people that the show isn't gospel, so read your Bible, then it's just entertainment. They don't say that in Season 2. They say that at the beginning of Episode 1 of Season 1, and they don't even say it in Season 2. So that's another big problem, and I talked about that in my last article. So it says here, what I wrote is, Hillel is a fictional character, a myth. He never existed. Neither did Shammai. But if you look up information about them, you will find endless Jewish commentaries treating them like real contemporaries of Jesus Christ. And they'll say they're far more important than our Lord in their teachings. Here's what a Jewish website says about Hillel. And I have a quote from a Jewish website that I found. It says, though little has been firmly established about Hillel's biography by historians, he is said by the Talmud to have been born in Babylonia around 110 BCE, or before Christ, and died in Jerusalem in the first years of the Common Era, meaning we would have said AD until recently when they started to use this Common Era BS. So I said, in fact, Hillel is said to have lived until 120 years old, which is considered the perfect age by Jews, because it is the age when Moses died. You can see that in Deuteronomy 31, verse 2, and it's the time span that God gave mankind before the flood in Genesis 6, verse 3. Isn't it interesting that historians can't firmly establish anything about this Hillel figure, despite such a long and amazing life at this very important period of Jewish history? You know, they have all this biographical information from the Talmud, but there's no historical evidence that he ever existed. And yet he lived to be 120 years old. Now, here's what Wikipedia says. Wikipedia says, in the Midrash compilation Sifra, that's a part of the Talmud, the periods of Hillel's life are made parallel to those in the life of Moses. At the age of 40, Hillel went to the land of Israel. 40 years he spent in study. And the last third of his life, he was the spiritual head of the Jewish people. These are all indicators, red flags, that this is a fictional character. Everything about his life is this fairy tale, ideal Jew, lives to be 120 years old, copies everything about the time of Moses' life. He becomes the spiritual head of the Jewish people, whatever that means. He's the foremost Pharisee. And so I said, what a divine coincidence. Even though nobody mentions him in history, the Talmud insists that this magical Hillel character had a life that paralleled that of Moses, their greatest champion and the father of their law. Isn't it bizarre to have zero mention of this great spiritual head of the Jewish people? Wikipedia also says, according to the Mishnah, which is also the Talmud, Hillel went to Jerusalem with the intention of studying biblical exposition and tradition at the age of 40 in 70 BC. The difficulties Hillel had to overcome to gain admittance to the school of Shmaiah and Abtalion, and the hardships he suffered while pursuing his aim are told in the Talmud. So again, this isn't real evidence. This is a Talmud propaganda story. This is a fairy tale made up by the Pharisees, who Jesus hated. Remember all those condemnations we read about the Pharisees? Those same people went on to become the rabbis who then wrote the Talmud. We can go back and look at some of them if you forgot. They are whitewashed tombs. They are a brood of vipers. All of the righteous blood on earth is going to be, they're going to be held accountable for the blood of all of the prophets of history. This is the rabbis who then go on to make up this Hillel character. Sometime later, Hillel succeeded in settling a question concerning the sacrificial ritual of this certain thing, and then on that occasion, it is narrated, they voluntarily resigned their position as the president in favor of Hillel. So Hillel is such a good arguer that he becomes the head of the Pharisees. After their resignation, Hillel was recognized as the highest authority among the Pharisees, and then they have in Wikipedia, in parentheses, the predecessors to Rabbinic Judaism. So according to Wikipedia itself, and, Jewish traditions officially, the Pharisees morph into the rabbis. And the rabbis are the ones who create the Talmud. So it's just the Pharisees under a different name. And Jesus himself says in the New Testament that they love to be called rabbis. So this is actually something that Jesus confirmed as well. This is very important because you have the villains of the New Testament then going on and creating a fairy tale about this Hillel character. And you might be saying, who cares about Hillel? What does it matter? Regardless of any of that, why don't we just, it still has the story of Jesus, doesn't it? What does it affect? It doesn't change anything. Well, just hold your horses. That's the whole point of the article here. I'm just setting up the facts some more. Over and over, you will find that the Pharisees, whom Jesus hated and who arranged for Jesus to be killed, were the direct predecessors of Rabbinic Judaism, who went on to create the very Talmud that invents Hillel versus Shammai myth. Rabbinic Judaism is fundamentally distinct from biblical Judaism because it follows the deceitful Talmud instead of the Old Testament. Christians have a hard time believing this, and because we love Jews and enjoy the idea of Jewish people following biblical traditions. It pains us to think they are so far from God's word and their own roots. Now, the next section is called the bad apple. Remember, the Chosen endorses the idea of Hillel and Shammai being very real teachers within the Pharisee party, the two houses who disagreed about everything. We are even shown Shammai in the flesh. You guys might not remember this. We are shown Shammai in the flesh, and he is a ghoulish and menacing figure plotting to take out Jesus. That's like the final episode of season 2. You see Shammai himself. So they absolutely confirm in the show that as far as they're concerned, and remember, they're trying to be as accurate as possible. They have special messages on their website saying this is as accurate as we could make it. And they show Shammai as if he was a real person in The Chosen. So I have a screenshot of him here. And I said, after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, the Pharisees took control over the Jewish way of life completely. The Pharisees took control of the Jewish way of life completely, since the Sadducees were all killed in the struggle against the Romans defending the temple. Obviously, this meant the Old Testament laws were impossible to carry out literally. How convenient, then, that their imaginary Hillel teacher had shown everyone how to carry the spirit of Torah without the temple and the priests. The Talmud was written centuries later to show how Hillel and Shammai disputed all sorts of things related to the law, and how Hillel was always correct. This revisionism has planted many satanic seeds that are still blossoming today in places like The Chosen. Without a doubt, The Chosen is pushing the narrative that the house of Shammai wanted Jesus dead. But the house of Hillel was decent and noble, if only a little bit misguided. In actual fact, as we already pointed out, Jesus condemned Pharisees generally, without distinguishing between two different sects among them, because there weren't two houses. Nevertheless, in order to hide their crimes and appease Christians, which began to include wealthy Greeks and Romans and those with more power than Jews, the rabbinic Talmud does what it can to distance itself from the supposed Shammai philosophy of the law. The vast majority of Pharisees were Hillel followers, they say, but the house of Shammai was more aggressive and ruthless. Therefore, all of Jesus' condemnations were against the wicked house of Shammai, leaving the house of Hillel to be innocent and moderate, acceptable to Christians. It was physically impossible for rabbis to insist on strict legalism anymore after the temple was destroyed, so they made up a precedent for somehow being observant Jews during the diaspora, ruling out the need for the Messiah, Jesus. That's the sum of the Talmud, is that we don't need a Messiah. We have Hillel. We don't need Jesus. We have Hillel. Hillel is our guy. Jesus is the Christian guy. Here's a quote. Hundreds of disputes between Hillel and Shammai are recorded in the Talmud, with the house of Hillel generally favoring a more lenient opinion, and the house of Shammai favoring a stricter one. The rabbis of the Talmud generally favored the views of the house of Hillel. So, the Talmud endorses Hillel. But in keeping with the Talmudic tradition, both opinions are recorded in the text. I said the house of Shammai is, in other words, the bad apple, or the small exception to the generally good and tolerable house of Hillel, not the overall rule. Now, here's where it gets really bad. Okay, if you've been wondering what the point is, why we care about Hillel, here's where you're going to start to see why the chosen is actually dangerous. The blasphemy goes much further, however. If you notice the time frame of Hillel's fictional life, you'll see that he was the ruling intellectual for decades immediately before the birth of Jesus. Hillel supposedly died when Jesus was a child, overlapping during Christ's crucial development years, when he would be studying the scriptures and speaking to the elders about it. This section is called Hillel, the teacher of Jesus. The house of Shammai came afterward, and would have been dominant during Jesus' adulthood, you see. That's why The Chosen shows the Shammai character sitting in a position of some power, scheming against Jesus during his lifetime. The next section is called God Endorses Rabbi Hillel Directly. And this is a quote from Jewish source, the Talmud, or a website explaining a Talmud teaching. According to a famous passage in the tractate Eruvin, which is from the Talmud, the disciples of Hillel and Shammai argued for years, saying the law was in accordance with their views. Ultimately, listen to this, ultimately a divine voice proclaimed, quote, "Both these are the words of the living God. However, the halakha, meaning the Jewish law, is in accordance with the opinion of Hillel." A divine voice. This is what the Talmud teaches. The Talmud says God, a divine voice, spoke from heaven and personally endorsed Hillel as being the correct teacher of the law. The Talmud goes on to note that the law follows the views of Hillel's disciples precisely because they were, quote, agreeable and forbearing. I said, now do you see the utter madness of this satanic tradition? The blasphemy. Here, the Talmud teaches that a divine voice came from heaven and proclaimed that somehow the teachings of Hillel and Shammai, who constantly disagreed with each other, were both the living words, the words of the living God, which is an idiotic paradox. But that Hillel was the true teacher of God's law. Good morning, Inzam and Godlove and Jay Thompson. Snappy says Islam rejects Hillel, correct? I don't know if they reject Hillel. I would assume so. But they would, reject a lot of stuff. So this divine voice says that Hillel is the true teacher of God's law. Therefore, we know the implication. What else could Jesus do except obey and follow the teachings of Hillel? Because he's the true voice of God. And then I have a screenshot of Mary here saying the last part of that saying. Remember we said early on, the first screenshot I have here is of Jesus and Mary touching foreheads, and Jesus says, if not now, and then it cuts to her, and she finishes the sentence saying, when? If not now, when? Right? Well, listen to this. The most well-known of Hillel's famous sayings, according to the Talmud, is, if I am not for me, who will be for me? And when I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, then when? If not now, when? Is the most famous Hillel saying. And in the show, The Chosen, Season 2, Jesus says that same saying to Mary, and she finishes his sentence. So this next section is called Talmudic Dog Whistle. Notice how subtly the famous saying of Hillel was incorporated into The Chosen during the Season 2 finale episode, right before Jesus is about to go give his famous Sermon on the Mount to the masses. At no point during the series so far have the writers bothered to explain this famous saying of Hillel, or shown that Jesus was studying Hillel's declarations about the law. But much like how the subtle, snake-like incorporation of Mother Mary's magical power to make requests of Jesus was added to appease Catholics, here we have the famous words being spoken by Jesus and Mary to each other, dog whistling to Rabbinic Judaism, that their Christian show considers their anti-Christian fairy tale real, and that Jesus was a follower of their mythological Hillel hero, repeating his famous phrase when he was most under pressure. The implication of the Chosen show is that Jesus was a disciple of Hillel. Now, if that doesn't anger you on some level, you obviously don't understand how dangerous the Talmud is. But the Talmud is like a wall that was built around Jews to keep them from knowing the Messiah, Jesus Christ. It's an entire religion built around trying to prevent Jews from believing in Jesus Christ. And Hillel is the main character of that story, that lie. And of course, the rabbis are the Pharisees. So Jesus had all that list of condemnations of the Pharisees. Those would all apply to the rabbis because they're the same people. And the Talmud is their book. It's their holy book. It's what their religion is based on. They don't read the Bible. They read the Talmud. And so the Chosen is endorsing the Talmud. Now I say, don't imagine that this is idle speculation either. As I found out again and again on TikTok, the quote-unquote Torah observers very directly argue that Jesus was an imitator of Hillel, and that everything Hillel taught was endorsed by Jesus Christ. They say Jesus was essentially just a guy who came by and promoted Hillel's doctrine during the reign of Shammai, and that Shammai Pharisees were the only ones Jesus had a problem with. So it's this small couple of bad apples that Jesus had a problem with. Most of the Pharisees actually got along great with Jesus. Jesus himself was a Pharisee. He loved Hillel. He was a Hillel follower. And Jesus really didn't come up with anything himself. It was all just ripped off from Hillel. Isn't that very convenient? This is why they believe you need to keep the Sinai covenant, speaking of the Torah observers, and take on the yoke of Moses' law instead of being liberated by Jesus Christ. And then I have a link to my YouTube video, Covenants and Their Conditions, that we looked at a couple days ago. So my conclusion, let me pull another quote. Hillel's famous sayings have been widely quoted and adopted. If not now, when? Was the title of a book by Primo Levi and an album from the American rock band Incubus. If Not Now was adopted by the name of an organization fighting to end American Jewish support for Israeli politicians that harm the Palestinians. The point here being, if not now, when, is the most clear signal, the most clear dog whistle that you are in support of Rabbinic Judaism and you believe that Hillel was a good guy and that he was a real amazing teacher that was better than Jesus. And that is what the Chosen puts into their show at their season 2 finale, as Jesus is about to do the Sermon on the Mount. As you can see, this is a famous saying even in modern Judaism. Only the ignorant Christians would miss it, being uninformed about the long history of deception stemming from the Pharisees and their rabbinic offspring. There is no excuse for any Christian indulging the Hillel hoax, especially if they claim to be striving for accuracy. When Dallas Jenkins, the show writers claim, and they have on their website, one, that the show accurately captures the scriptures and events surrounding it, and two, that we enhance the impact of the story with facts and meanings you might not be aware of. That's a way of saying we're going to shove crap into the show that isn't in the Bible, but it's going to be facts, quote-unquote facts, that you weren't aware of. And so the Hillel story is this entire subplot in Season 2 of The Chosen that is not factual. In fact, it is a complete lie. It is a Talmudic lie. But they put it in there anyway. And they even show Shammai himself in the show as the bad, sniveling, evil man. And then Jesus quotes Hillel right before he does his Sermon on the Mount. And why would he say that right before he does the Sermon on the Mount? It's because the Sermon on the Mount, according to people who believe in Hillel, the Sermon on the Mount is just a copy of what Hillel said. The Sermon on the Mount is just Jesus ripping off his teacher, Hillel. Jesus didn't come up with anything important. All of the sayings that Jesus taught, Hillel said them first. You see? They come up with a character hundreds of years after Jesus, but then they pretend he was born right before Jesus was. And they tell a story about how he came first and said everything that Jesus said. And so Jesus is just a loser who came by and copied Hillel. And The Chosen has the balls to go and run with that story and have Jesus quote Hillel's most famous saying with foreheads touched to, Mary, and if not now, when? So what are they really saying in The Chosen? They don't have the honesty and the integrity to say, yes, Jesus was just a knockoff of Hillel. They wouldn't want to piss people off by doing that, because that would get everyone very upset and no one would want to support The Chosen anymore except rabbinic Jews, because they would be laughing at Christians and saying, look at these idiots. They bought into our scam of Hillel. But Christians would be upset if they knew who this Hillel guy was and what, if not now, when actually meant, and why Jesus was saying it at the moment he was about to give his Sermon on the Mount. So the last paragraph here is just this. They are misleading their audience or are severely misled themselves. God knows the truth. I only know that The Chosen is steadily injecting many heresies into their programming, and they need to be called out. And then I have some footnotes for where you can look up other stuff. So this is the thing, right? I get the sense from chat, Travis here says, it is dangerous because it is pure fiction being injected into the spiritually immature and minds that are still fed by milk, always itching to hear but never determined to read their own Bible. And yes, it comes from the Babylonian Talmud. The thing is, even if you read your own Bible, this whole lie of Hillel is designed to perfectly skirt around what the Bible says. Because it's written after the Bible, hundreds of years after Jesus, like 200 or 250 AD, they can go back, and that's why they pick the time frame that Hillel lived 120 years and he died just a couple of years into the life of Jesus. And then Shammai outlived him, and he was the guy that Jesus was condemning. So this is all designed very carefully by the Pharisees, who Jesus hated, to retcon, to rewrite history, to do a revisionist history, to make it look like Jesus was only condemning the Shammai people, and the Shammai people are all gone. They're not there anymore by the time it's, it's 250 years later and the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud gets written. There's no more Shammai people anymore. It's all Hillel followers from now on. So basically, Jesus didn't have anything to say about the Pharisees, because those few bad apples, they're all gone. And to this day, it is just shocking and disgusting and evil. First of all, that so-called Torah observers go around saying that Jesus was just a ripoff of Hillel, and they buy into this deception, and they try to fool other people. I saw it all the time on TikTok. All these legalists on TikTok. But The Chosen has this perfect opportunity to tell the story of Jesus in these long seasons with these long episodes and really dig into the material. And of all the things they could say about the life of Jesus, they go with this lie. They go with the Talmud instead of the Bible. They literally show, I have a picture right here on the screen. You can't see it on TikTok, but on YouTube, this is a screenshot from the show where they show the character who plays, or the actor who plays Shammai. And he's this gravelly voiced, evil, ghoulish man who is, yes, we will kill Jesus. Oh, yes, we will find a way to condemn him. Oh, I'm such a bad guy. He's like literally, this is the idea, is that there's one dude in all of Jerusalem, one Pharisee, who's actually evil in the entire Bible. And his name is Shammai, although it's never mentioned in the Bible. Isn't that convenient? In fact, no one mentions Shammai or Hillel in the histories. Not even Josephus mentions either of them. Josephus, who wrote the history of the Jews for the Romans, and he was mentioning all sorts of people. He never mentions Hillel or Shammai. Why? Because Josephus wrote his history in, I think, around 90 A.D. But the Torah, the Talmud, was only written like 250 A.D., over 100 years later. That's when the rabbis go and make up Hillel and Shammai. And then they make up all these weird excuses for why Hillel was never mentioned by Josephus. So it goes on and on and on. The entire Rabbinic Judaism religion is a never-ending cover-up of the Pharisees' crimes. They're always trying to add more, quote-unquote, context to everything. That's why the number one thing that legalists do is talk about context. There's always some missing context that the rabbis have that you don't have. Oh, Josephus didn't mention Hillel or Shammai, but that's just because, they were so famous that no one needed to be told about them. Or, yeah, well, it mentions these other guys, and it doesn't say that they're related to Hillel or Shammai, but this other guy he mentions over here, that's the brother of Hillel. This other guy over here, that's the cousin of Shammai. Well, it doesn't say that in Josephus's history, but the Talmud and the rabbinic traditions claim that all these other people were secretly connected to Hillel and Shammai. It's actually very obvious that it's a lie if you bother to look into it logically. There's no archaeology, there's no history, nothing points to this being real. Shadowraid says, Jesus points out frequently that you violate the commandments of God for the sake of your tradition. Yes, your tradition. And beware the yeast of the Sadducees and Pharisees, the doctrines of the Pharisees. Yeah. So he doesn't say the house of Shammai. He says the Pharisees, all the Pharisees, because they were an evil group. Nicodemus is like a rare exception. It wasn't that most of them were good guys. And so I just hate that the chosen is deceitful and that they don't even have the balls to come out and say what they're trying to say. They have Shammai, but they don't explain the real difference. They do a little bit for like a second. They talk about the house of Shammai versus the house of Hillel. But they don't actually explain it so that an outsider, a regular Christian, could understand. What the hell are they talking about? Why are these Pharisees, walking around and debating as if there's these two different groups? And who is this Shammai guy? Why should we care what he says? They could go and easily have a flashback and show Hillel. One of these episodes could start with showing Hillel. And he'd be, 110 years old, however he looked at that point. And then he would go and, Hillel would be saying all these sayings that were exactly what Jesus said. Hillel came up with the idea, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a Hillel saying, according to the Talmud. So they could go and actually show Hillel saying all of the same things. This basically, Hillel would go around saying the Sermon on the Mount to everyone. And they could start the episode that way. And then, so when he's 110 years old, that's when he hears about Jesus being born or something, or the Magi coming. And then you'd be like, oh, so this Hillel guy was like Jesus before Jesus. And honestly, if they did that, I wouldn't even be as mad. Because at least then, they would at least be honest about the fact that this is just a big advertisement for Hillel. Instead, they slip it in there so that only those who already know the saying, the code words, if not now, when, those people will understand it. And Stapleton says season 3 was Sermon on the Mount, just came out. Yeah, I intend to watch season 3 in the near future. I wanted to get this written first. Shadow Raid says, because if they were honest and condemned the system of the Pharisees, they'd have to point out the condemnation back at themselves as well. Jesus hated organized religion that has departed from what is written. And Shadow Raid quotes Matthew 15, verse 9, for in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. Right. So that's Jesus did a lot to point out the problems at the time when he was there. And I'm going to be curious what they do with the show, because obviously these Pharisees are going to be a bigger and bigger part of the series. And we know there's supposed to be 7 seasons of The Chosen. They've announced that. So there's going to be 7 seasons. I assume that they're not going to go much past the resurrection of Jesus, and they're not actually going to show Paul and, the book of Acts and all of that stuff. So that gives them a lot of time to explore this whole Hillel and Shammai thing. So I wanted to write this now because if the show keeps going on, by the way, we hit 10,000 likes. Thank you very much for that. That's very good of you guys. And sure enough, more people are joining the stream, so welcome to everyone new who's coming in. We're talking about The Chosen Season 2. If you've heard about the show The Chosen, I have a big problem with the deceptiveness of the show. Shadow Raid says, what if that's exactly what they do? Wrap up this Jesus story so we can get to the blessed Pope. I mean, if they do, I think I would actually respect the show more, because they'd be willing to go out so far on a limb that you would have to see where they actually stand. But I would be stunned if they did. It would be, here's another thing. They might start to introduce Paul in the story early on as a Pharisee, right? And presumably, Paul will be a House of Shammai person, you see. Paul will be one of these bad Shammai followers, and that's why he's persecuting the Christians and he's being a bad guy. And so I can expect them in the next seasons, if they are going to do that, to put Paul in there back when he was called Saul, and he'll be one of these Pharisees, and then they can set up this idea that essentially Paul didn't go from being a Pharisee to being a Christian. He just went from being a Shammai, House of Shammai follower to a House of Hillel follower. And again, why does this matter? Because the whole idea is that you don't need to get rid of the Pharisees. You just need to get rid of the bad Pharisees. You just need to get rid of the House of Shammai. The House of Hillel, those Pharisees that became the rabbis, they were the good guys. So, yeah, don't get rid of the law. Don't get rid of the Old Testament covenant and the requirements. Hillel basically teaches you how to live as a Christian, or not as a Christian, as a Jew without the temple, you see. So a lot of legalists don't even realize it. Legalist Christians don't even realize it. But they're falling for the Hillel hoax themselves without having ever really looked into Hillel. But the rabbinic Judaism is all based on the Talmud. And the Talmud promotes this fictional character called Hillel, and they don't want to get rid of the law. They want to keep it, even though they don't follow it, really. And the other funny thing is that if there was such a guy as Shammai, he would be correct. If you're going to keep the law, Shammai would be the guy who tells you you should actually keep the law. That's the whole famous thing when you read the Talmud. Shammai is always saying, the Torah says we need to actually light these candles. It says that we need to make these sacrifices. We need to, keep the Sabbath. We need to stone adulterers, all these things like that. Well, okay. Shammai is the guy who's saying that. And then Hillel says, forget about that. Just do what's right and, be merciful to people and don't worry so much about keeping the law the way that it's written. And then the Talmud always sides with Hillel. But actually, Shammai would be correct. See, but they want to do the bait and switch. You don't need Jesus. You don't need a new covenant. They claim that Jesus just renewed the covenant. So you're still under the Sinai covenant. You're not under the Messiah. The Messiah hasn't come yet. Of course, they reject totally the idea that the Messiah has come. That's why you have to keep doing the Old Testament. And then on and on it goes. Now, obviously, the Chosen is saying Jesus is the Messiah. Obviously. They're showing him do the miracles. Obviously. So they are going to end up saying Jesus is the actual Messiah. He's the King of the Jews. He's the rightful person. But they're going to stop short of saying that the old covenant is gone and he's establishing the kingdom of heaven. And that's why I think they downplay John the Baptist and they call him Creepy John. I didn't even get to that in this article. I'm almost thinking of writing a third article just because this is such a big history lesson of things that most people have no idea what we're even talking about when you talk about Pharisees and Sadducees, much less Hillel and Shammai. But I just wanted to get the facts out there and show official sources for these things. But the reason why they hate John the Baptist in the show is because John the Baptist taught about the kingdom. John the Baptist was preaching repentance of sins, the end of the law, and the beginning of the new covenant, the kingdom. But they don't want to go with that angle. They don't like the new covenant. So they're going to go with this rabbinic tradition of Jesus didn't really change anything. Jesus basically just showed up and said, hey, guys, be nice to each other. And remember the sayings that Hillel said. Hillel is our guy. Let's be more like Hillel. Don't imitate me, Jesus Christ. Go just listen to the teachings of Hillel. And I would predict that that's the way that the show is going to go, is they don't emphasize the kingdom and they don't emphasize that the Pharisees were generally evil. They're going to have the Shammai guys take the fall and the Hillel guys be basically these poor, misunderstood schmucks who are, they don't quite get Jesus because Jesus is so crazy and so weird. All of the sayings of Jesus are so wacky. And, he's doing these miracles and he's speaking in parables. And John the Baptist is just an even retarded guy. He's just, Creepy John, the weirdo who goes around, eating bugs all the time. So, of course, the Pharisees didn't listen to John the Baptist. He was an idiot. Look at him. Peter is constantly making fun of him and calling him Creepy John. So they're burying John the Baptist and they're promoting Hillel instead. And that way they don't have to deal with the kingdom. Because if they actually gave proper respect to John the Baptist, they would have to listen to his message, which is about the axe cutting down the tree at the roots and rejecting the Torah keepers as if they were righteous and establishing all these new covenant rules. Shadow Raid says, do they have chosen Jesus talk about the kingdom at all? I think he does a couple times. But it's like very abstract and not like a continuous message. It's almost like Jesus himself is struggling to understand what he's saying, and they sort of just play up Jesus like he's reaching, you know, he's always sort of out of his element. And same thing with John the Baptist. They're like spitballing and like brainstorming ideas together, and like they don't really have a clear message. And so I guess that's supposed to show the humanity of Jesus and the humanity of John the Baptist and whatever, but ultimately it just undermines their power and their Holy Spirit. Because the thing about the Holy Spirit is that it gives you a very clear and sharp message, but we don't get that from Jesus. And I'm guessing the Sermon on the Mount is where he's going to start, you know, really teaching properly. But is he really going to be teaching, or is he going to then go give the Sermon on the Mount and then walk around for the rest of the season explaining to people that he basically was reiterating what Hillel had already said? So maybe no one else cares about this stuff like I do, but as soon as I saw Jesus saying, if not now, when, and I saw them have Shammai as a character in the show, that would be, just so you guys know, I'm trying to think of a way to get this across in a way that you could understand what that means. That would be like showing the Prophet Muhammad in the show as being a real person, not that Muhammad wasn't a real person, but as if he was like a prophet, or showing like, you know, a complete other religion in the show and saying, yeah, this was real too. Jesus was there at the same time as this guy. It's like, excuse me, did you just put a different religion into this Christian show? And now you're passing it off as factual? So they destroy the factuality of John the Baptist. They destroy the factuality of Peter and of Jesus, and they totally butcher the historic context of that time, like I talked about in season 1. And now they're adding in the rabbinic Judaism traditions, the Talmud. Travis says, I wonder if one show could really condition a large segment of society. I don't think so. Like, the show has broken records for its fundraising and for its popularity, its support, and it just barely got another major partner, a non-government organization that's going to help fund it. And so it's going to get translated into like 100 languages now. They're just getting massive support for spreading it everywhere. And so it's not that it's going to overturn American evangelism, but rather they're going to try to get in very low and pick up all of the fragments, you know. They're going to go to languages where they don't even know the gospel, and this is how they're going to show them it. And so they're going to be introduced to Christianity in The Chosen. And so that's why it bothers me so much if they slip in lies along the way. Patronizing Saint says, I'm behaving in case no one noticed. And Travis says, yes, I noticed. I am not. I need to. No, you guys are good. I was kind of thinking it seemed a little bit quiet. I wanted to just plow through this article kind of full speed just because you really need to hear the end, I think, before you understand the point. This idea that the Talmud says that God, a voice from heaven, declared that Hillel teaches things in accordance with God's law, and the idea that Jesus was learning from Hillel, this fictional character. All these things are very offensive, but I wanted to lay the groundwork first. So that's why I wasn't listening to reading comments as much. But let's see what else we got here. Stapleton says, I think they show Jesus as loving, but not a true Messiah's light. Yeah, I mean, definitely he's shown as being loving and sensitive and humorous and all these nice qualities. But they're not giving him credit for his own teachings, the way that he should be. You know, if you listen to the TikTok followers, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the legalists on TikTok, but they will tell you that Hillel had 12 disciples. He walked around and he didn't do miracles the same way Jesus did, but the Jews actually believe that it's offensive that Jesus did all these miracles, that he claimed to do these miracles, because they don't believe he actually did those miracles. He just said that he did. And so Hillel is a good example of someone who taught a bunch of good things, but he didn't, call himself the Son of God, and he didn't claim to do miracles and stuff. So Hillel is this good example because he doesn't go as far as Jesus. And they make up this whole history of how everything about Jesus' ministry was just a ripoff of Hillel. So, that's how they get you. And there's a lot of Christians who are buying into this right now. And they are evangelizing. They're trying to convince another generation of Christians to buy into Torah observing and keeping the Old Testament law instead of the New Covenant, because they believe these lies. They fall for it. And I want to believe that the chosen just fell for it as well, and that they're not purposely deceiving people. But when they slipped in that last sign here, or this last thing where Jesus and Mary say, if not now, when? That just told me these guys know exactly what they're doing, and they're just being subtle about it. They don't want to set off any alarms, but if you know what that saying means, which I happen to know because I've looked into this stuff, that's when you pick it up and you're like, I see. So Shammai is in the show. Jesus is quoting Hillel. I get it now. Travis says, pray for them. Invite to Terry's work. Patronizing Saint says, I've heard several people talk about the show and say how accurate it is. Yes. I'm expecting a lot of people. I don't even look up what the conversation is around The Chosen. I just know that it's breaking records. And it's making huge deals, and they're getting millions of dollars, and they're being translated into every language. And it breaks my heart a little bit because it has such a good premise. The music is so good. A lot of the acting is so good. It has so much potential to do the right thing and to be very powerful and accurate. But instead, it's slipping in more and more of this very dangerous teachings. And all I can see from here is that it's going to steer more and more and more into that path. And then Peter is going to end up being the Pope. And, John the Baptist is going to just be a laughingstock. And, Hillel is going to end up being sort of this like main character basically of the show. And it's like, it could go so wrong if they don't fix this stuff. Godlove says, I saw pictures of the actors doing the wicked symbolism. Do you mean like different hand gestures and stuff? Travis says, I followed Church of God, non-SDA, and they are sound, but Terry did a great job helping me in several areas that the church failed. See, interesting study I did with the family today. Sermon addressed falsehoods and make you wonder about their spiritual condition. If it is not sound, then they will fall for it. Patron Saint says, who are the writers of the show? I don't know who all the writers is. I know that Dallas Jenkins is the showrunner and he's the main guy. He's the guy that authorizes everything, no matter who writes what. Dallas Jenkins is the guy who ends up approving whatever it gets in the show. But he has quote-unquote consultants, and I believe they're anonymous. Anonymous consultants. There's Jewish and Roman Catholic consultants for the show. And so my thinking is that probably the Roman Catholic is saying, we got to hype up Peter and Mary. And the Jewish, I think he said that they're all believers, which in that case would mean it's a Messianic Jew. It's a Jew who believes in Jesus. And that he's saying, well, don't forget about Hillel. You can't leave out Hillel if you want to be accurate. You know that Jesus was really a follower of Hillel, right? And so he's putting in that deception, and the Catholic is putting in the other deception. And maybe Dallas Jenkins is just such a dupe that he doesn't realize he's being used by these different factions. And he's just excited that he gets to make this big show and that he's making lots of money for this thing. And he's, he is being successful. And at times it's very powerful and it's very good, But what does Jesus Christ say? A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. A little yeast spreads throughout the whole lump of bread. And he literally says the Pharisees' leaven, the Pharisees' yeast is what spreads. And so that's this. A little bit of Pharisee ends up making you into a legalist, Torah-observant, Sinai covenant trying to fulfill the Sabbath and the feasts and all of the different parts of the Old Testament. It starts to spread. It starts small, but it starts to spread and spread and spread, and eventually you don't even believe in the new covenant anymore. If you listen to the TikTok Torah observers, they will end up telling you that that Jesus didn't change anything. We still have to do everything that the Old Testament said. So I think Dallas Jenkins might be surrounded by, like Tina says here, wolves in sheep's clothing. Stapleton says Dallas met with the Pope in Rome to discuss the show's success. Well, he gives me the impression of a straight out like jock, like never read a book in his life, has no idea what's going on around him. Just a happy, probably a cool guy to just sort of spitball with. He seems like the kind of guy who's so clueless that it's almost adorable. But he's surrounded by absolute, propagandists, is the impression I get. Now, maybe he's just really good at being charismatic and he just actually knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows he's deceiving people or whatever. I don't get that impression, but the idea that the whole cast and crew are Satanists and stuff, I don't believe that at all. I would have to see some really condemning evidence to believe that. Travis says, anonymous stuff is always bad stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the consultants are named. At least I don't think they were in season 1. I think I looked it up for season 1 and they weren't named there. So guys, I mean, whatever. It's up to you if you want to watch The Chosen despite knowing this. If you want to, you know, like, I really got almost nothing out of season 2. It didn't feel powerful. Season 1 felt very powerful. I was, very touched by a lot of the stuff in season 1. Season 2, I didn't feel like it was written as well. They immediately pissed me off by making fun of John the Baptist. Like, you're already in the trash can if you don't like John the Baptist. And then there's a lot of weird stuff going on, and they started focusing on the Pharisees, all this. And then, there's just a lot of weird stuff in season 2. It didn't feel powerful. And so you can watch it, but this is just another example of taking a good potential and just throwing it away, in my opinion. And by the way, guys, if you like this kind of thing, if you like that I'm writing these articles, go to the Winter Christian, which is, the URL is winterchristian.substack.com. And, give it a like and give it a comment, or share it with people if you want to share it with somebody who likes The Chosen and you want to give them some food for thought. Marilyn says Revelation chapter 2, verse 9, and Revelation chapter 3, verse 9. Yeah, Shadow Raid also said that. That's where it talks about the synagogue of Satan. I recognize those verse numbers. The synagogue of Satan absolutely might be a reference to the Pharisees and the rabbinic Judaism tradition. It might be. I'm not saying it is. But considering synagogue is right there, and considering that they hate Jesus to their core, and their whole religion is about rejecting Jesus, there's nothing really more satanic than building your whole religion around rejecting Jesus. So I would say that qualifies. But again, here on TikTok, you guys can see this Linktree/Wolfpox. That's where you can find a link directly to my Substack. And so if you don't know how to find it, you haven't used Substack before, my bio has a link to this Linktree. You click on that, it'll pull up the menu, and you just look for the Substack link. Click on that, it'll take you to the Substack, to my page, and then you'll see the Hillel Hoax as one of the articles on there. And you can share it, like it, comment on it, follow the account if you want. When you use Substack, you basically sign up to become a part of a newsletter, or a mailing list, I should say. So every time I post a new article, it gets emailed to you in full, so you don't have to go visit the website again. You don't have to go visiting Substack every day, like Twitter or whatever. You just open your email, and it'll be right there with pictures and with formatting and all that kind of stuff. It's a very nice service if you want to not have to. I don't think you have to make an account either. You just put your email address right in the slot, and then it signs you up for the mailing list. I like Substack a lot. I'm using it. I have some other ones that I've written recently. Actually, I didn't even mention this one. It's called Spotting the Green Horse of Revelation. That one is, that one is also right up my alley. It's talking about the Green Horse of Revelation. I wrote that one a couple days ago, so you guys might want to go there. Jordan says, I was moved in season 1 and will probably watch more, but pray for discernment. Is it free or subscription? It's free. I believe it's free on all sorts of different platforms, but you have to have an account on those platforms. So like Tubi and like I don't know. There's a bunch of, I don't know all the streaming service names, but it's streaming for free on a lot of different platforms. Oh. Mm. Let's see what I missed over on YouTube land. Okay. Travis says, take us back to the law. Can't allow us to grow in faith in the life that Christ wants us to have. Satan's spirit can't allow that. Patronizing Saint says, confused or deceived people then spread false doctrine. And then you can look at people you trust and they are really misled, not trying to mislead, which gives them more clout in a weird way. Yeah, when somebody genuinely believes in something that they've been deceived about, they become more influential. And that's exactly how the Torah observant movement spreads. Godlove says, Russell Brand did a lot of pictures, wicked, with the main actors. Yeah, Russell Brand is definitely not, he's definitely the New Age, Luciferian style. The fact that he would take a picture with someone doesn't mean that they're evil, but depending on what they're doing, and, these are just actors, right? They're not good examples. So certainly they might be into all sorts of weird stuff behind the scenes. Travis says, so I can sit there and shake my head? No, thank you. I can spend better time with my family or exercising or even studying my own Bible. Yeah, I mean, I'm watching it so that I can critique it and I can know what's out there. Like you said, I want to observe these things so that I can warn other people about it or find out what sort of propaganda is being spread around. Travis says, yes, it's important, as people will look up, and this will be on the internet forever. This will be a seed. That's how I see it, yeah. People might stumble on, they might look up Hillel eventually. Let's say season 3 ends up mentioning Hillel a bunch of times. You might get a bunch of Christians who end up Googling Hillel. And I would like my article to be one of them that they find, and then they can say, oh, I didn't realize that this is a giant hoax and that the show is pushing a lie. Patronizing Saints says, exactly. We have this obligation as Christians to defend our faith, which is constantly under attack from many directions and sources. It seems okay. It's okay to hate on Christ and Christians. Don't get me started. And Godlove says, keep the Most High close to you and read your Bible. Let the Holy Spirit guide us. Biggest is the only truth. That's why they hate us. Godlove says, they hated me first. That is what Jesus Christ said. They hated me first. Okay, well, I don't have a lot. I wasn't planning on doing a chapter of Luke along with this. I wasn't sure how people are going to be reacting, or if people are going to have tons of questions, or if people would just sort of, go along with it and not say much about it. It is a kind of a long article, but that's that. Godlove says, you did great, Terry Wolf. The important is the truth. Travis says, not a small part. It's huge. Thank you for being that thorn. And Patronizing Saint says, because putting up a do not kill is a problem, right? The 10 Commandments that are our problem. My sister-in-law, an officer in the Free Thinkers. Terrible human. I hate that, but she is. Is it Thursday? It is Thursday. I didn't even realize that, Travis. It's my last day. Maybe I should jump off early and get a start on the rest of my week. C10 Dave says, came in late. Can you summarize the hoax? Absolutely, I can summarize it. So, depending on what you know, it'll be easier or more difficult to summarize. But The Chosen has a running storyline in season 2 about the idea that the Pharisees were divided between two houses. One is called Shammai, and one is called Hillel. And neither one actually existed in history. So that's already the hoax, is that there was no such thing as the house of Shammai. There was no such thing as the house of Hillel. The idea of those are both in the Talmud. And The Chosen just straight up shows Shammai as a real person who was trying to get Jesus killed. And so they're going along with the Talmud instead of the Bible, and that's the hoax. And so I felt the need to explain to people how The Chosen is just not even, skeptical apparently of this Talmudic teaching about Hillel. By the way, the Talmud says that Jesus is burning in hell forever. And boiling in excrement, actually, is what it says. So if you think that the Talmud has any tolerance for Christianity or Christ, you are sadly mistaken. The Talmud is one of the most wicked books in the entire world. It is Satan. They also teach that pedophilia is completely normal if they're young enough. If they're a few months old or something like that, then it's not a sin. The things that are in the Talmud are enough to make your stomach churn. It's actual just damnable heresy, and they try to hide these facts actively and make excuses for it and say, well, we're not saying that's true. That's just what a rabbi said once upon a time. The Talmud just records conversations between different rabbis, Hillel and Shammai. I don't know which one. That would actually be interesting to find out which side of that debate Hillel was on. Maybe he was the permissive one that said it's actually good. But there's stuff in the Talmud that would make you want to barf. And The Chosen is now saying the Talmud is true, that Hillel and Shammai were these real teachers that came around before Jesus, and that Jesus was just a copy of Hillel. Excuse me? Hey, Luke from VOR. Welcome, man. Everyone say hi to Luke. It says, like the brisk. The Chosen is promoting the Talmud. Yes, it is. My article, I don't know if you saw any of it, Luke, but I wrote an article called The Hillel Hoax. And it's a whole article on my Substack about the Talmud being endorsed in The Chosen. Marilyn King says, who reads that? You mean the Talmud who reads it? Every single rabbinic Jew reads the Talmud daily. They read one page a day. The Talmud, rabbinic Judaism is called the world's biggest book club because they synchronize the reading of the Talmud every page one day, and everyone reads the same page on the same day, and then they all go to their rabbis and ask them what the meaning of it is, and it's called the world's biggest book club because of the fact that they study the Talmud. They don't read the Bible. They don't read the Old Testament. They don't care about the Old Testament. They read the Talmud, which is 17 volumes, not 17 books in one like the Bible is, a bunch of books combined into one. It's 17 separate volumes. It's an entire library. It takes up a whole shelf, a whole bookshelf. That's what the Talmud is. And it has these endless conversations between Hillel and Shammai in there. And some of it is just very generic. It's just about, legal matters or whatever. But it does touch on pedophilia. It touches on Jesus Christ. It touches on these other things. And people over time have looked up those things and said, wow, this is truly satanic. Vor says, like the brisk was in reference to the bad things in the Talmud, the brisk ceremony. Ah, I see. I don't even know what that is off the bat. I'm sure I've heard of it at one point. All I know is that the Talmud has some of the most evil stuff in it, and now, apparently, The Chosen is endorsing the fiction that's at the center of it all. Godlove says, like Balenciaga, or Balenciaga. Yes, yeah. Think Talmud when you think Balenciaga. Travis says, yes, this is what I said earlier. Exactly. Hateful and satanic. Yeah, I know, Travis. I know that the Talmud, you've been on it, and I totally agree. I've known about it for years. I haven't felt the need to comment on it until now that much because I didn't think Christians were going to start promoting it. But here's The Chosen, and they're just going for it. Jesus is quoting Hillel in the show. Vor says, Google rabbis giving babies herpes through brisk. Is that what they call the circumcision thing? Because in that case, I do know what it is. Patronizing Sensei says, I try so hard to be more kind, but then I just decided the Anti-Defamation League needed to know about them while they were busy researching us. Travis says, study the Star of David. Yeah, I know about that whole... There's a couple different theories about the Star of David. None of them are good. Travis says, then studied the Talmud, etc. I started in 2008 and studied daily since. I love Terry's work, big fan of his, and can see God's hand in his work. Patronizing Saint says, I can see you're well informed, Travis. It's very helpful to have you in our group. Thank you. Too many Christian churches today are lenient to the point where it's all watered down. It's a problem. Yeah, and people are afraid of being canceled. They're afraid of, thinking that if you call out the Talmud that you hate Jews or something. It's like, no, actually, when I love somebody, I want them to know the truth and I want them to escape from deception. And so we want Jews to understand their Messiah. We want them to escape from the Pharisaic cult that they were raised in and brainwashed to accept. Vor says, I assure the procedure they are doing is not in Torah. Yeah, the brisk. Okay, then I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Truly disturbing what goes on in these synagogues. Also, I'm going to look up something here. Actually, I'm going to have to look it up in a new tab just so that I don't get weird results and then show it on stream. Yeah, I don't even know if I can show this on stream. There's a Vice article, one of the most amazing articles I've ever read, from November 11th, 2013. I don't know if I can even talk about it. It's called the Child R-Word Assembly Line. Rabbi Nuchem Rosenberg, who is 63 with a long graying beard, recently sat down with me to explain what he described as a child R-word assembly line among sects of fundamentalist Jews. This is a Vice article. It blows the lid off of I don't think I can explain it on stream, but you can look it up. I will post it on my Discord, a link to it. I'll do that right now. If you guys go find my Discord, it will be in the section called Stories and Tips. I can't believe that Vice went and actually wrote that story, but it's from a rabbi exposing his own disgust at what happens in synagogues with children. Nunya says, Paul in the New Testament was plagiarized from Plato, Aristotle. Thoughts? Well, my first thought would be prove it. Marilyn says he rewritten Torah to their liking. Who did? Who rewrote Torah to their liking? Stapleton says, we love Jesus and the truth. Amen. And I cannot read it. I'm too sensitive. I'll lose sleep and cry for days. Yeah, it's a horrifying and traumatizing thing to think about. I don't blame anyone for not wanting to read it. But if you ever do want to get a cold splash of reality of just how evil the Talmudic rabbinic Judaism thing can be. And I'm not saying of course, not all rabbinic Jews or rabbis are bad. Maybe the vast majority of them are themselves terrified and shocked, just like how a lot of Catholic priests are very disturbed at what happens with the offending priests in the Catholic Church. Doesn't stop it from happening, and it doesn't mean that the higher-ups are dealing with the problem and weeding it out, and for some reason law enforcement isn't stepping up and doing anything about it either. So these are just, again, the point here is that the enemies of Jesus Christ love to pretend to be the most holy and have this iron fist where they can get away with anything they want, and they will twist and bend Scripture any which way they can in order to get away with their crimes. And we shouldn't be shocked at that. That is what we should actually expect, because Satan is the ruler of this world. And we're not going to be able to change it either. But what we can do is wake up our fellow believers and get them to understand just how bad things are so that they don't fall for the next deception. And that's why I talk about The Chosen. Is The Chosen mostly good? Yeah, it's probably mostly good, at least for now. But how many of these different things have to be in there before we've now put too much yeast in that dough? It's just going to spread throughout the whole thing, and the whole thing is going to end up being corrupt. To me, I don't like my Christianity to be tainted with Talmud at all. Godlove says, I don't see anything. It's blacked out for me on Discord. I'm seeing the story there. Vice.com. Bailey says, now I actually want to watch and see how stupid this Chosen thing is. Yeah, you can. Patron Saint says, and you can see my screen name, how I feel about Catholics. Travis says, why the children? Because they are the closest to God. It is their hate for God and all things that are pure and innocent. It angers them when they know they are animals and will not see the kingdom. Patronizing Sense says, I have a friend whose husband recently revealed he was a victim of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. It has devastated his family. It has harmed him so much. He told me and explained a lot. Travis says, yes, you nailed it. So many don't know that Satan is the god of this world. Yeah, I mean, I talk about that and maybe everyone is wrong all the time. VOR says, so to be clear, they are pushing the Talmud in addition to the Mormon influence. Well, what they're doing is they're depicting characters that only exist in the Talmud as if they are real people at the time of Jesus. There's a character in The Chosen called Shammai, the Pharisee, that is not a real person. There's no historical evidence that he existed. It's a Talmudic invention, and they just show him in the show as if he's a real person, and Pharisees are talking to him, and he's the bad guy. He's the guy that's trying to kill Jesus. All the other Pharisees are good guys, but Shammai, he's the bad apple. He's the bad guy. And so the Talmud does this thing where they split Pharisees into these two fictional groups, and most of them are the good guys, but there's a couple of these bad apples, and they show them in The Chosen, like as if they're real people. And then at the season 2 finale, Jesus quotes the most famous quote from Hillel, the fictional character Hillel, that's also in the Talmud, which is, if not now, when? It's part of this saying that Hillel had. Not that Hillel was a real person, but the Talmud says that he said this thing. And so, essentially, I don't know, do you count that as pushing the Talmud? They don't talk about the Talmud, of course, but they are showing parts of the Talmud tradition as if it's real when it's not. And so the show clearly is endorsing the idea that the Talmud is has accurate information about historical characters like these Pharisees, and either the showrunners are too stupid to realize that the Talmud is fiction and it's an anti-Christian document, or they know what they're doing and they are slipping in Pharisaic teachings into the show, Talmudic teachings into the show. Yeah, Vor says, I so badly want the show to be legit. Me too. And I actually, a lot of the part of season 1 I liked. I liked a lot of how season 1 was. VR says, I was super hesitant to watch it, but I was surprised by how good season 1 and 2 was. Well, you might not have noticed the stuff in season 2, that I noticed, because I was noticing this. Also, they completely crap on John the Baptist. They call him Creepy John, and they keep making fun of him and saying he's eating bugs and making jokes about him. And he looks like this weird loser, and he's not getting any respect. And we're reading the Gospel of Luke right now. In most of our morning studies now, we're studying the Gospel of Luke. And John the Baptist is like a rock star, amazing, blessed by God person. And then the show, they just crap on John the Baptist. So I hate that already. VR says, I saw a couple of wonky things, but was able to discard those. VR says, John is an absolute stud. In the Bible, he is. Not in The Chosen. All right, guys. Travis says, yeah, dig in and enjoy the learning. It will expand a lot of understanding how evil, amazing journey. I know one thing, I won't be fooled. Satan has the world for now, says Patronizing Saint. That's true. It's just for now. Patronizing Saint says, I cried all the way home. We have been best friends for 30 years. I never didn't even know. Now it hits home. I've watched hearings where survivors of Catholic child abuse, it was in Britain, or I don't know if it was Ireland. I think it might have been Ireland, but they were testifying. These are old men, gray-haired old men, and they were testifying about how badly they were abused. And the whole crowd and this whole panel of experts and stuff, they don't apologize. They're so ice cold and no one cares. And these guys, these poor guys, are breaking down in tears as they're remembering what happened, and they've been silenced this whole time and stuff. And their whole culture is just based on shutting up people who got abused, and no one apologizes, and they just have to live with it and suppress it. And I got so infuriated by watching it. I couldn't believe it. That was a long time ago. It was probably 10 years ago or something that I saw that video. But to know that there's this whole classification of people out there who have been abused, and just like in this synagogue story about these rabbis in Israel and in different American cities and stuff, they just get away with it. It's a criminal organization, and they just get away with it. Stapleton says, thanks for the best part of my day, y'all. I really enjoy learning with y'all. God bless. Bible says, put light on evil, not hide it. Okay, guys, I think that's it. Thank you, Luke, for the surprise visit there. And tomorrow, we're not going to be doing another one. I'll be back Monday morning at 6:30 a.m. if you guys are willing to join me. Thank you for the 13,000 likes. That's very cool. I know that today was a little bit of a shorter stream, and it was also, not continuing our study of the Gospel of Luke, and it's this weird article about something you guys probably didn't care about. But hopefully now you at least have a little sample of the kind of thing that I've been looking into and that's been annoying me recently. Travis says thanks. Patron Saint says thanks. Thank you all for joining. I mean, the fact that you guys are participating and supporting me, and hopefully you guys go check out the Substack. Go to my link tree, find the Substack, follow it there. I post about a lot more stuff than this. I post about, actually, maybe next time we'll do a study on my other article, which is called Spotting the Green Horse of Revelation. That's a little bit more in the tradition of what I've been teaching about on TikTok. So, Patronizing Sense says it was very important to know, and Travis has agreed. So, we got guys here saying Paul directly plagiarized Seneca. So, we got some people in the chat who are trying to dispute the Bible. Ignacio says, I'm late. Yes, you are late, but you can watch this back on YouTube. That's the nice thing about it. Perceive Zero says, thank you for sharing the truth and exposing evil. God bless you. And Brandy says, will you do a study on marriage? I have done a bunch of studies on marriage already. I have a whole lecture on, actually, I think it's a 2-part lecture in my YouTube channel, a couple hours long. If you want to get me talking about marriage in the Bible, I've done studies on it, and it's come up recently in our study of 1 Corinthians. So I feel like I've been talking about marriage way more than I ever intended to. It just seems to come up in these different studies. Alrighty, guys. God bless you. Thank you for joining. Monday, 6:30 a.m. Central Time is the plan for the next time. Patronizing Saint says, I am interested in the concept of past lives and WTF it comes from. Well, that is a big topic. I can give you a link. Actually, it's part of my Substack. I know I'm shilling my Substack like crazy here, but it turns out I wrote a bunch of stuff and it might help you. Different topics. The article you could read is called, on my Substack, is called Report the Holographic Universe. The Bible of New Age Secular Mysticism. And it'll at least help you sort of get into a little bit of the idea of past lives and why it's a popular teaching these days, and why these how the New Age ties in with quantum physics and all of these teachings. Not that this is the source. This book isn't the source, of course, of past life teachings and stuff, but I did a book report on this book that is a very, very influential modern book about it. Travis J says, I learned about TNT radio here. Yeah. Next week, I think I'm going to be, Monday probably, I'm going to be back on TNT radio. Guys, I love seeing this. I love seeing the support. And Teddy says, here's a tip. Don't get married. All right, guys. Have a good weekend. Thanks for your support. Check out the YouTube channel and the Substack and find what you like. Also, I don't know if it's actually convenient for anyone, but my entire podcast is, listed on my Substack as well. So you can go back into my Substack and find every episode of my podcast as well. So, maybe you missed some episodes and you can just listen to it on the Substack. I don't know if that's convenient for people, but it's an option. Bye-bye, TikTok. And guys on YouTube, Patrons and Saints says, I'm looking into TNT also. I don't have time to actually listen to TNT radio myself. It's kind of sad. I'm on it, but there's all sorts of really interesting stuff on there that I look at and I'm like, dang, I want to listen to that. And because of everything else I'm doing and writing my book and all of that, I just feel like I'm cramped for time. But I'm very much glad that it's a growing, successful platform. I'm glad to be a part of it. And I love that Mark Morano has a show on there. I'm a big fan of Mark Morano. Okay. Thank you, guys. I feel like I'm missing something. I forgot to say something, but I don't think I did. So, yeah. Check out the Discord if you guys haven't already. Look forward to next week. You guys can message me and send me stuff on Telegram, Twitter, Discord, whatever, and I'll try to get around to it and be receptive. Patronizing Saint says, yeah, I'm not buying the past life thing, but where did this originate from? Anyway, it's very interesting. Well, if you want to talk about like reincarnation, like you're going all the way into like ancient Buddhism and Hinduism and stuff. That's thousands and thousands of years old. So the book referral is not going to teach you that stuff. It's just, why is this still around and why are people popularizing it in the modern time? But if you look up reincarnation, I mean, that's about as old as it possibly gets. That might predate the Bible. I mean, I don't know. And anyway, all right, guys, thanks a lot for watching. And I had